Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Whether this is your first time listening in or whether you've been a loyal listener for however many episodes, I am so grateful to have you back. It means the world to me, all of you listening each and every week and sharing episodes with your friends. And I am just so incredibly blessed to have you here with me today. Today's episode is about deconstructing a kindergarten to fifth grade music standard. How to do that. How do you do that? This is something I know I felt super duper stuck on when I got my first elementary music teaching job. I had no idea how to do this, no idea how to long-term plan and how to lesson plan for that matter. You see an objective, what exactly do you do with it? It is very confusing. It's something back to what they don't teach you in college. One reason I wrote my book, Make a Note, What you really need to know about teaching elementary music, is for this exact reason. There's so much that you do not learn, and the link to that book, by the way, is in the show notes, but there's so much you don't learn about being an elementary music teacher until you get in there and you realize, oh my gosh, like I really don't know how to do some of this stuff. You may feel stuck. You may feel like you don't know where to go to ask these questions. And you also maybe have the feelings like I have before of, I should just know how to do this, right? Like I have my degree in hand. I got hired for this job. These are things I think I should know how to do. But let me tell you that that's not necessarily true, and it's not the case because there's a lot they do not tell you. So that's my goal with this podcast and everything else I do is to help you with the things you may have questions about. So this is a question I see asked a lot. I personally get asked a lot. I have coached teachers one-on-one or in my Harmony membership with this exact topic. So what I want to do, first of all, is let you know that there is a blog post that goes right along with this episode. The link to that is in the show notes, or you can simply go to thedomesticmusician.com/blog and you'll see it right there. So this episode is going to be in two parts. Part one is I'm going to give you the steps to deconstruct a music standard. And then in part two, I'm going to give you the exact way and a concrete example I'm going to use third grade as an example and how I laid it out in my classroom and now how I have laid it out in my Harmony membership site, how I've deconstructed standards in there for music teachers today. So let's go ahead and dive into part one. The first thing I want to say is when you're deconstructing a music standard is you're going to think of it like backwards planning, which kind of sounds like backwards, I guess you can say. But what backwards planning is you're looking at your long-term, what you're doing all school year, breaking it down into 9 weeks. Then you're breaking it down into smaller chunks, and then you're deciding what exact lesson plans, songs, activities you're going to do to cover that. And I know you're hearing me say that and you're like, wow, you just said a lot. That's a lot of work, but stick with me. I promise this episode's going to help guide you in how to do it. All right. So I'm not wanting to lose you yet. So don't be so frustrated and overwhelmed that you're like, what? Okay, that's a lot. So stick with me. So I have mentioned on this podcast before, and at the time of this recording, I am exactly halfway through my master's degree in educational technology. And I'm currently almost finished with one of my classes is called Designing Tech Instruction. And the reason I'm talking about this is because we are doing something called instructional design. And it's really been eye-opening to me that I've kind of already done that before, but without even knowing that's what it was called. So, instructional design, whether you're a classroom teacher or a course designer, you go about it the same way. And it's exactly what I said a minute ago. It is thinking long term about what your students need to know, like the big picture. Then actually you think about assessment first, which when I went through this course, I'm like, wait a minute, how do I create assessment opportunities before I'm planning out lessons? Because as a teacher, that's normally how we do it. But this course has been eye-opening to me because it's having you create assessments first, then even backwards design there, knowing how you're going to assess your students. Then you even backwards plan even more. So it's long-term planning, thinking about what your students need to know, then about assessment, then the objectives, then how the overall content can be broken into smaller chunks, the teaching process, how are you going to teach the lessons, and finally, the actual lesson planning. So I'm not expecting you to like know how to do all that right away, right? Like that is just me giving you the general synopsis of what instructional design or backwards planning is. And some of that may be out of order than what you're used to doing. I know for me it is. It was very like confusing at first going, wait, why would I put assessment ahead of lesson planning? And so let's break it down even more that in a way that makes sense. The first thing you're going to do when you're thinking about backwards planning or deconstructing a music standard is look at your standards. Now, I know you get told to do this a lot. Just look at your standards and teach them. And you probably do that. You look at your standards, whether it is the national music standards, maybe it's even the international standards. Maybe your state has specific standards they want you to follow, or even your school district. I know going through college, we learned a lot about the national music standards. And then I taught in the state of Oklahoma. Oklahoma had their own standards, but then I got hired in Tulsa Public Schools, and they, because it's a large district, so sometimes this happens, had their own standards just for the district that they asked me to teach from. So it gets a little confusing when it's going to look different at different school buildings. Maybe you're at a new school building, whatever state you live in, it's going to look different across the board. You're going to not follow the same set of standards as another music teacher. It depends on whether you're in a big or a smaller district, whether you're in a state that has created their own standards, or whether you're just asked to teach from the national music standards. So the reason I'm leaving it kind of generic is because of that reason, because you're going to be using standards based on your teaching situation. So I want you to look at, even as you're listening to this episode, pull up whatever standards you teach from. So you're going to pull those out and look at them. Okay. If you need to pause this episode and get them out, go ahead and do that. So you're like, all right, I'm looking at them. Like, what do you want me to do with this? There's a lot there. Yes, there is. There's a lot written out. Your standards may already be broken out into 9 weeks. They've maybe already done that for you. And someone may have already deconstructed standards and said, teach this here, 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 here. Or if you're looking at the national music standards, for example, they don't really break it out into what to teach to each grade level for each 9 weeks. It tells you what to teach to each grade level, but it doesn't tell you when or how, right? It's kind of open to interpretation, which is kind of the cool thing about being a music teacher, let's be honest, is you get to decide how you're going to teach those specific standards and objectives and concepts to your kiddos. So let's go back to that. Pull out your standards, whatever you're teaching from, and the next thing you're going to do is you're going to find, or you can create your own curriculum map. There are so many curriculum maps out there that are amazing just for music teachers. I know I am not very active on Teachers Pay Teachers, but one of my products that sells like crazy is my curriculum map I've created. And also in the Harmony membership site that I run for elementary music teachers. Each and every day I'm in there and it's very active is a curriculum map. And that's one of the first things I direct music teachers to when they join the membership site. So, or you maybe already have one you use based on whatever curriculum you're already using, whether it's an online curriculum, an in-person curriculum, whatever it might be. So you're going to look at your curriculum map. Okay. So you have the standards, and then you have a curriculum map. These are two different things. Why? Well, the standards tell you what to teach. A curriculum map, which is a scope and sequence, tells you when to teach those objectives throughout the entire school year to each grade level per 9 weeks. All right. So this is going back to deconstructing standards, right? Those are the first things you're going to do. Do you see I'm kind of going backwards? Here's the standards. Now we're going to look at the curriculum map. It's scoped out through the entire school year. And then the next thing you're going to do is from the education you received in your music ed program or different professional development opportunities you've gone to. Maybe you've taken an ORF or Kadai level course or something else, Dalcroze or whatever it might be, or any other training. You should have a rough idea of what the different grade levels need to learn and when. But I also want to say that if you are stuck on this part, then that's why going by a curriculum map with a scope and sequence is so helpful. So different professional development opportunities, or maybe your college program, like I said, they gave you a rough idea of what each grade level needs to know to build upon to go into the next grade level, and then what they need to know and to go into the next grade level. So that is your next step, is think about what objectives and concepts your students are going to need to know each 9 weeks to build upon. It's like building blocks, right? Or bricks. What they need to do to build upon each other in order to lead into the next grade level. Now, remember, stick with me because part 2 of this episode, I'm going to give you some like a concrete example of exactly how I do this. So the next step, you've looked at your national music standards or your music standards. I just use that as an example. Then you've looked at a curriculum map. You have that in front of you. Maybe it's one you've created, or maybe it's one you just use that's been provided to you. Then you think about the education you received, whether that was in college or professional development opportunities, and what each grade level is going to need to know per 9 weeks. And then we're at the point where you're going to go to your songs and activities. This summer, I taught a workshop about lesson planning, and it was all about how to organize your songs and activities based around objectives and standards. So one of my goals for you is for you to create, it could be a running Google Doc where you have all the objectives to teach throughout the entire school year, but it's broken down into 9 weeks, and it's also broken down by grade level. And then all you have to do is go in and add this song from this resource, and you put it there so you know how to easily refer to it or pull from it throughout the entire school year. It's like a living document that you can add different songs, activities, books, whatever other things you use in your classroom, technology ideas, and you can take things away or add it in as needed. Now, if you missed that workshop this summer, you can go to episode 157 of this podcast, and I give you a kind of a breakdown of exactly what I just mentioned on that episode. So you have a resource list. You are kind of a living document, like I said, where you're adding songs and activities to that list under different objectives based by grade level. The next step is to know what objectives you want to teach and then create lesson plans around that. So you're in the first 9 weeks. You know you want to teach steady beat, let's say to kindergarten. You say, okay, I'm going to go to my resource list that I've created with songs and activities based upon different resources I have available to me. And then I'm going to create a lesson plan around steady beat. And I really like this activity. Maybe it's a name game, right? At the very beginning of the school year. And so that is the lesson plan you're going to create around that objective. Then I also want you to think about where your students are and where you want them to go. A lot of the advice out there is just given around what to do for each grade level, but a lot of the people giving the advice don't take into account that some of your students are not going to be on a fourth grade level in music, for example, because of different circumstances. So let me backtrack a little. What I mean by that is if you're at a school like I was at that hadn't had a music program for several years, your fifth grade standards will need to be simplified based on where your students are. And I'm going to tell you that's okay. So when you're thinking about deconstructing a standard, you're going to have to deconstruct it even further for these kiddos, and maybe you're going to do a combination of some fifth grade standards, but you're also going to backtrack a little bit and maybe even pull out some first through fourth grade standards to meet your fifth graders where they're at. Do your fifth graders know that? No, of course not. And it does not mean you're using first grade songs with your fifth graders, but you're going to still plan relevant lessons for your fifth graders based around objectives that meet them where they're at. So don't let that trick you up and say, oh my gosh, like this standard is telling me to do all this stuff with my fifth graders. They're not ready to compose using technology. They're not there yet. That's okay. That's okay. So you're just going to have to backtrack a little bit and say, all right, this is where my fifth graders are this year. And that's okay. So how am I going to meet them where they're at? It's not about catching them up. It's about meeting them where they're at and creating relevant learning experiences based on where they're at. Where are they in the objectives? What concepts do they already know, and where do they need you might just need to go back to the building blocks, to the very, very first building blocks of teaching music with your fifth graders. And that's all right. But I also want you to remember that every class is not going to be on the same level as well. Some of your classes, let's go back to fifth grade, for example, some of the classes will be ready to move ahead further, and some will need to take a little bit more time. So that all goes into it as well. It's not just a blanket approach and a getting out, getting all the planning done for fifth grade and it's okay, it's finished. No, it's about really knowing your classes and what they need from you. So as you are backwards planning and deconstructing standards, you might just need to like have sticky notes on your desk, or going back to a living Google Doc like we talked about, or maybe you use an in-person or online planner. Whatever it looks like for you, just keep notes of that. Keep notes of what classes need what from you. And okay, they're going to be able to do this activity. We're going to leave that one out for this class. But are they still covering the same objectives? Yes. Is that the goal? Yes. Is the goal also for your students to learn music? Yes. Do the classes know that they're doing the same exact thing or not doing the same exact thing as the other classes? No, they do not. And so that is where I want to go with that point. So the last point on this before we move into part 2 is about, which I just said this, but in a Google Sheet or a planner, keep track of what lessons you've taught so you can go back and take out or add in new content as needed. It's all about keeping track of not just what lessons and activities you taught, but like I said, what classes have done what, which ones can move further ahead and you can add in extension activities, and which ones need a little bit more work on that particular standard before moving forward. But keep track of everything. You have the standards, you have your curriculum map, which you can constantly make notes on that as well, or maybe it's editable for you so you can edit out standards as needed. Then you're looking at what resources you have and you're making a running list of songs and activities based around the standards. Then you are lesson planning based on what your students need. And then, of course, assessment is part of it as well. And I mentioned earlier, this class I am taking has us plan out assessments before we even lesson plan, but you do not have to do it that way. But remember, you're planning relevant assessments as well based around what you're lesson planning. And remember to definitely have higher order thinking involved in the assessments, where you're not just having students answer generic questions you're having laid out, but have them really think about what they are doing in the music room. Okay, so here's the fun part. We're going to move into part 2 of this episode, and I know I'm going fast. So, like I said, you can definitely go to the blog post that goes along with this episode, and it has all of this that I'm saying today laid out for you as well. And part 2 is I'm going to give you a concrete example for third grade for the first 9 weeks. When you're looking at the third grade standards, here are a few of the concepts I want my third graders to know before moving on to the second 9 weeks. First of all, before I get into that, I want to say that this might look a little bit different for you based around your teaching style, your training, where your students are, like I spoke to you earlier, and what teaching method you follow. This is the exact curriculum map I created for myself when I was teaching, and I now provide inside my Harmony membership site. For the first 9 weeks, I want my students, I'm going to give you just a few of the objectives I have inside my curriculum map. So, one of them is I want them to experience playing and singing rhythms using ostinatos. Another one is they're going to begin learning the meters 2, 3, and 3, 4. Then I really want them to focus on dotted half note, whole note, not notes, and 16th notes. And another one is we're going to really be focusing on same, different, and similar phrases. Now, in the full curriculum map inside of my Harmony membership, I have a lot more written there, but those are some of the ones that third graders, I want them to focus on in the first 9 weeks. So knowing that, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, so this is the objectives I want my students to know. What am I going to do about it? Like, how am I going to help them learn these concepts? I'm not just going to tell them, here's what a phrase is, here's a similar phrase, here's different, here's similar, this is the same. Okay, did you learn it? Great, by doing a worksheet. No, in the music room, I want my students to have interactive learning experiences where they're getting up and moving. They're having small group and partner and really collaborative group work assignments where they're singing and moving and playing rhythms and experiencing music together. The third grade standards I've looked at, they're mapped out for the first 9 weeks. And then what I'm going to do is, after looking at all of the standards, I pull out a Google Doc, just like I talked about in part 1, or even a notebook. I am terrible about having, and I've mentioned that on this podcast before, but I'm looking at my desk right now, by the way, and I have about 12 different notebooks, not kidding, laying around me. So what's horrible though about doing paper pen is then you forget what you've written where. So I know I keep saying Google Doc. It does not matter to me if you use a Google Doc, something else, Asana, whatever it might be for you. Any way you like to stay organized, that is totally fine. So I'm going to just keep using Google Doc as an example because that's what's worked for me. So after looking at all of the standards, pull out a Google Doc and then decide how you're going to divide the standards out into the entire 9 weeks. So in part 1, I talked about you look at the standards, you look at a curriculum map, but the curriculum maps are mapped out for the 9 weeks. So I just gave a few examples of different standard or different objectives, that I want to cover with my third graders, but that's for the entire 9 weeks. So then I'm going to say, okay, let's say there's 8 objectives there. How am I going to divide that into 9 weeks? So that's the next thing I do is I look at it and I literally will say, okay, so experience playing and singing rhythms using ostinatos. How many weeks am I going to focus on this for the first 9 weeks? I decided I'm going to focus on it for the first 3 weeks. Does that mean that's the only objective I'm covering? No, I may layer that where I'm doing that for the first 3 weeks of the first 9 weeks of school, but then I'm also focusing on beginning learning meter of 2, 3, and 3, 4 at the same time. As long as you're covering those objectives that are supposed to be covered for the first 9 weeks, it's up to you how you break it up into those 9 weeks. Some of them will be covered the first 9 weeks, some in the middle, some at the end, some throughout the entire first 9 weeks of school. It does not matter how you break it up. This goes back to you knowing your students. What do they need from you? Are they ready to move into these objectives yet? Or do they need to go back a grade level to those objectives in order to be able to get to the point where they are ready to cover those objectives? So I have looked at my standards. I have divided out that particular first 9 weeks of standards. Remember, we're focusing on third grade, and I have broken it down even more throughout the 9 weeks of how I'm going to do what I'm going to teach, what objectives I'm going to teach. Notice I have not even started lesson planning yet. I am just dividing the objectives and concepts down, breaking it down throughout that first 9 weeks of school and knowing which of those objectives I want to teach when. Then, after doing that, I look at the organized list of resources and the song and activity list that I talked about earlier as well. I still do that when I am planning, whether it is for students or whether I'm planning for my Harmony membership site. This is exactly the process I have always done. So I look at that list of songs and activities and I begin deciding which lessons would work the best to teach to those standards. I may need to adjust and adapt as I go, so leaving room for flexibility is key. And it's also okay to change your mind. It's also okay to say, I want to teach this particular song or activity to cover this objective. And then you decide, actually, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to do this instead. That's all right. It's okay to do that. Your students are not going to care if the third graders the year before did a particular song and this year you're doing something different with them. They don't care about that. Okay. It's up to you what you want to do with your kiddos. And in the Harmony membership site, by the way, I do make every single lesson plan editable. So you can add in or take away things based on what you need to do with your students. Because I do completely agree that flexibility is key and that every single teacher is going to want to do things differently. And that's okay. So let's go on to the next step. So let's say we're going to choose one of the objectives that I mentioned earlier. So let's say I'm covering the objective of experience playing and singing rhythms using ostinatos. Let's just focus on that particular objective. I'm going to use a song that I arranged, by the way. It's called Good Morning, and it goes like this. Good morning to you, and did you sleep okay? I hope you're ready for the day because I want to play. So it goes like that. And then what I want my students to do, of course, they're going to learn the melody together. Then I want my students to add on a singing ostinato that goes like this. Morning, morning, how are you? Morning, morning, how are you? Morning, morning, how are you? Over and over and over, because an ostinato is a repeated rhythmic or melodic pattern. So what I would do next is then when my students are ready, I would say, I want this group to still sing the melody while this group, maybe you're just dividing the class into two parts. This group is going to sing that melodic ostinato. So you have some students, good morning to you, and did you sleep okay? While they're going, morning, morning, how are you? And this will be a bit tricky because the students are going to be listening to the other part and then try to sing what they're singing, just like when you do a round. So that's the next part is add on a singing ostinato. And then the next part is I'm like, okay, I also want my students to focus on a rhythmic ostinato too. I may do that the same class period. My students may not be ready to do that yet. And if they're not ready yet, that's okay. So the rhythmic ostinato part will go like this. Snap, 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 pat, 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 clap, 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 snap, snap, snap. What I like to do when I'm teaching a rhythmic ostinato is I like students to say what rhythm part they're doing as they're doing it to get it in their head. So I will have them actually speak the word snap, clap, or pat. So let's do that again. Snap, 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 pat, 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 clap, 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 snap, snap, snap. And then as they're adding it underneath the actual song, they'll just speak it in their heads, and you can tell students to do that. So then you've sang the melody, you have a melodic ostinato, then you have a rhythmic ostinato, then you can break the class into three parts and have them put it all together. Like I said, you are deciding on your calendar how long are you going to be covering the objective of rhythmic and melodic ostinatos with your third graders? For me, I decided to do it for 3 weeks. It may need to be extended longer. It may need to be a shorter period of time. You may want to cover a melodic ostinato for 2 weeks and a rhythmic ostinato for 1. This does not mean, by the way, you are only doing rhythmic and melodic ostinatos the first 9 weeks of school and that's it forever. That just means that is the point of the school year that you are focusing fully on teaching that objective. Then the rest of the school year, you're going to continue adding that in to different activities all year long. I chose this activity because it covers the objective I'm wanting to teach them, and it also has a movement activity the students can do as well with a partner. So, as you know, when you're looking at songs and activities, there are 400,000 things, maybe not that many, but it feels that way, that you can do to a song. And it can make you feel stuck where you're like, okay, do I teach just the song? Do I add in movement or do I add in a rhythmic ostinato or melodic ostinato? Are we doing instruments? Are we just doing body percussion? Am I going to practice rhythm counting? And just can make you feel stuck. So that's why we go back when we talk about deconstructing a standard is you're focusing on what objective is it. So if the objective is focusing on a rhythmic ostinato or melodic ostinato, it does not mean you can't do a movement activity or a partner activity as well. It just means that your main focus for that particular lesson is that objective. But know that you can always go back to that song later on and add other things in as well. There are so many songs you can do with your students. Of course, there are. But when you break it down, instead of focusing on, I'm going to teach this song, and you reframe your thinking into I'm going to teach this objective by using this song, it will help your mindset so much with not feeling stuck with not getting through every single song that's out there in the universe because there's so many to teach. There really, really are. So let's talk about the next part. What would I do next or what have I done next? I then lay out the I can statements based on the objectives I'm covering. So for this objective, based on what we're teaching, I would have the I can statement as I can use ostinatos or something along those lines. I almost said I can use objectives because that's what I've been saying, but no, I can use ostinatos based along what objective you're teaching with your students. You will break it down into an I can statement that yes, you can physically have it posted on your wall somewhere, pulled up on a smart board or whatever, however you do it with your kiddos. And these are, by the way, are also provided in my Harmony membership, I can statements. So then I would then think about the assessment. I'll look ahead at how many more weeks I plan to cover this objective. When I'm thinking about what lessons I'm teaching to my kids, what songs, what activities, then I'll start thinking about how am I going to assess them for understanding. And that's a whole nother episode for another day, which we can definitely do an episode like that. But I planned, like I said, to cover this objectives for the first 3 weeks. But then, of course, students will continue using these skills the rest of the school year. Your goal is to focus on one main objective or concept. Then, with the other skills like singing, movement, rhythm counting, etc., covered as well, and that's just kind of implied. I hope that makes sense. Where you're not going to say, okay, this first 9 weeks, we're going to do a lot of movement. The next 9 weeks, we're going to really focus on singing. And then we're going to do a lot of instruments. No, it's kind of intermingled all school year long based around what objectives you're teaching to your students. So just because you've covered rhythmic or melodic ostinatos the first 9 weeks, it doesn't mean that you cannot also cover that objective other times of the school year. It just means that is when you are heavily focusing on that objective. Let's think about steady beat. You probably at the beginning of the school year also focus on steady beat. Let's say mainly with kindergarten, actually every grade level, but let's go to kindergarten. You're really helping them find the steady beat. Does it mean you stop focusing on steady beat the whole rest of the school year? Of course you don't. Of course you don't. You keep reintroducing it. You keep talking about how are we keeping the steady beat in this song. Even when you move on to other objectives that take the focal point of your teaching, that's what you're really focusing on, steady beat is still there. It just means this is the part of the school year that is the objective you say you are covering. And then after you've covered it, the cool thing is you get to bring it into other things you're doing all school year long. I want you to also realize that nothing is ever set in stone. If you need to go over this objective for a longer period of time, or you get through it quicker than expected, that's okay. Also, going back to what I said earlier, remember that every third grade class won't necessarily be at the same place, and that's perfectly okay too. That's where having a living Google Doc or an online planner or even a bunch of sticky notes to keep track of things comes in handy. Long range and backwards planning, it takes a lot of work up front, but once you do it, it's done. And then you're able to plug and play the activities to meet the objectives your students need to learn. Or you can join my Harmony membership where I've already done all of the hard work for you. Head to harmonymembership.teachable.com and you can sign up for the wait list to join if the doors are currently closed so you can be notified when the doors reopen. If you have any questions after listening to this episode, please don't hesitate to message me on Instagram at Jessica Peresta, and I'll help you out. You can also sign up for one-on-one coaching where I help teachers individually apply what you learned in this episode to your own teaching life, to your own particular students. And you can find out more about that by clicking on the link in the show notes or shoot me a message and I'll send you more information about coaching. Have an amazing day, friends. Please don't ever forget the impact you're making in the lives of your students. And if this was a lot for you to digest and take in, because I know I said a lot, go look at that blog post that I mentioned, and it will have everything I said here today laid out in a sequential way that you can apply in your planning for your standards, how to deconstruct the standards you have, and you can move forward in that way as well. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook group. Come on over and join us there where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.